Welcome to Innovation and Leadership. I'm Jess Larson. On this episode, we get to have Robin Mansukhani. Robin is a genius in the world of longevity biotech and doing some pretty interesting things in the world of senescence, which if you don't know what that means, that's okay. We're going to be explaining it today. Robin, will you tell people a little bit about the company and thanks for doing this?
Yeah, of course. And thanks to you, Jess, for having me on. So Deciduous is focused on harnessing the immune system to treat diseases of aging. And so specifically what we focus on is we have sorted out through our early work how the immune system can actually naturally regulate these inflammatory senescent cells that you often hear about in the field of longevity and aging. And so our claim to fame is that we actually have figured out when you're young and healthy, your immune system is really good at removing senescent cells, but no one really understood how that happens, which immune cell type, what goes wrong, et cetera, et cetera. So at our early work in the company, we figured that process out. And so it turns out that natural killer T cells can actually regulate a wide variety of senescent cells in multiple different diseases. And so we did a publication on this a couple of years ago, so I won't go into all the details, but it basically talks about how NK T cells can regulate senescent cells. And what's most interesting about our work is that we've shown several times now that when you use one dose of an NKT agonist, small molecule, basically a fancy way of saying we can reactivate NKT cells, they can remove senescent cells with one dose, but most importantly, that actually resolves both fibrotic and metabolic diseases with that one dose. So that's really why the biology is powerful. Senescence and the immune system is interesting, but ultimately what you care about, does it actually treat disease in a meaningful, translatable way? And that's what we've shown so far in our studies.
Okay, so let's break down a lot of these words for people who don't have a PhD in biology. Let's start with a senescent cell. Again, especially in the higher net worth community, a lot of people have gotten much more interested in their own longevity, and obviously biohacking has become a bigger deal in the last decades and stuff like this. It gets tossed around things like, oh, those zombie cells that are sticking around, but you want them to be gone. And I don't know, the cell isn't taking out the trash, or you hear analogies like this. But let's go like a little deeper, but in a way that my high schooler could understand of what's the problem. Like, what is a senescent cell and why is that a problem?
Yeah, so in the senescence definition has shifted over the years. So I think let's try to bring it totally up to date. So these are cells that have been irreversibly damaged, and so cells can become damaged all the time. What's good about our bodies is we have what's called a DNA damage repair mechanism, and so when your cells get damaged, oftentimes they can just be repaired through this DNA damage repair process that we all have. The issue is sometimes cells get damaged to an irreversible stage. And so think of it maybe like a car wreck. Like maybe the reversible damage is a fender bender, but then, if you have irreversible damage, maybe that's like a car getting totaled. And so irreversibly damaged cells are candidates to become senescent over time if they're not removed by the immune system. And so what happens biologically is the irreversible damage will happen. Examples of that irreversible damage include things like excess glucose, so diets, injuries like concussions, ACL tears, and the more granular biotech words like ROS, reactive oxygen species, telomere shortening, which basically means your cells have divided the maximal time and they can become senescent when they can no longer divide. But there's different ways for cells to become irreversibly damaged. And so what happens normally is when these cells become irreversibly damaged, the immune system, when it's healthy, your natural killer T cells will recognize those senescent cells and say, hey, I've got to go and remove these. Unfortunately, with disease and with aging, the senescent cells start to accumulate at a rate that the NK T cells cannot keep up with. So it's kind of like saying the NK T cells more or less get run over.
Yeah. And what's an NKT cell?
So that's a natural killer T cell, and it's a very small percentage of immune cells that have often been, I think, misunderstood for a couple of decades now. So they do have a role in cancer and influenza, but our data suggests actually one of their primary roles is in removing senescent cells that even have nothing to do with cancer. Cells are irreversibly damaged. The natural killer T cells should be removing them, but they can't keep up with the accumulation of these cells. And so these cells, when they don't get removed in a timely fashion, they become very inflammatory. And that's what's called collectively called the SASP, or senescence associated secretory phenotype. And basically, that's a fancy way of saying they're very, very inflammatory. And basically what they're trying to do from an evolutionary perspective, the inflammation of the cell is trying to say to the immune system, hey, there's a problem here. Come and look at me. It's kind of like trying to send a flare up into the immune system and saying, hey, problem, come and take me out. The issue is with as we get older and as we have too many of these cells, the NKT cells, they just can't react in an appropriate amount of time, and so the cells start to accumulate more and more. And when they accumulate, they drive fibrosis, they drive stem cell exhaustion, they drive chronic inflammation. So they're not meant to be there for a long period of time. The good news is with an approach like ours, if you activate and proliferate the NKT cells, meaning that you basically drugs that can reactivate these cells to be more effective and make more of them, they will come, and it's basically like saying the army has been wearing thin, but with a drug you can make them, you can add to the army, and when you do that, you can remove them actually quite quickly.
And in like a, again, a junior high analogy version here, when you say reactivate the army or multiply the army, are you like this medicine, is it triggering the body to produce more of them? Is it a catalyst for the ones that are there but dormant to get going again? What's a way to understand that?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's more the latter. So the drug itself that we've made, it basically binds to the NKT cells. So the NKT cells are a unique type of immune cell. It sit there, and on any immune cell or T cell, there are different places where a drug can fit into a receptor. And if it fits properly into the receptor, one of the natural functions we have is that you can not only just reactivate the cells, but they will expand. They will start to multiply again. So when the drug is made properly, when it binds the target on the NKT cell properly, it will activate and proliferate these cells. So now the army multiplies, and then you've got a big army of immune cells that can get rid of the problematic senescent cells.
Okay. So what's an example of how, these irreversibly damaged cells could hurt me metabolically?
Because what happens is when they become so inflammatory, it basically overrides your immune system. And so, actually, part of metabolic disease actually is suppression of the reason metabolic disease is sometimes so bad. It's suppressing your immune system over and over and over again. So that's what's happening. So you basically the suppressed immune system, the inflammatory cells. As I mentioned a couple minutes ago, one of the fastest of these cells called the SASP, or the senescence associated secretory phenotype, total mouthful, so let's call it SASP. And the SASP is basically can be up to 60 different inflammatory factors coming out of a senescent cell, all of which might do different harmful activities. So, for example, one of the SASP proteins is called TGF beta, TNF alpha, GDF15. There's many of them, but those alone can drive fibrosis. And fibrosis is basically just degradation of tissue, degradation of kidneys, of livers, of hearts, of lungs, muscle, etc. So these inflammatory factors that senescent cells elicit all of a multifactorial function that drives disease. So you're actually getting like sometimes 10 different types of disease from a single senescent cell because they have these factors that drive different pieces of disease.
And let's go through those for the kind of diseases people might have heard about. Like, I'm guessing pulmonary fibrosis.
That's a huge one, yeah.
Kidney fibrosis.
Yep.
Crohn's disease.
Yep.
What else?
Dementias, so any Alzheimer's, Huntington's, Parkinson's,
Why?
sarcopenia.
Help me understand on that one.
Yeah, so the dementia piece is that it's very similar. You're getting irreversible damage to cells in the brain. So your neurons, your astrocytes, which basically help give stability to your neurons, your glial cells, which are immune cells of the brain, they can all become senescent. And so when they aren't removed, they create a very inflammatory profile in your brain. And that can drive Alzheimer's, dementia, can drive Huntington's, it can drive MS, Parkinson's, Lewy body dementia, all the 30 different kinds of dementia that there are, different inflammatory profiles that will drive different indications.
Yeah. So, this is one that is obviously so important to so many people. Like, cancer sucks, everything sucks. But in many ways, people are more, in my experience, are more afraid of dementia, Alzheimer's, because this sense of feeling out of control, this sense of, like at least with diabetes, you feel like, well, maybe my diet can help, and maybe then I can start doing these other things, even if I do get it and stuff. Where Alzheimer's, it has almost like how humans fear the unknown more than most
Yeah.
things. To me, I don't know if you feel differently. It has it like in society, it has a sense of the unknown and the out of control and this aspect of it. Um, so obviously, a lot of people have been trying things in Alzheimer's for years of varying effectiveness, but it doesn't seem like a lot has been incredibly effective in the dementia Alzheimer's world. With this, what is encouraging to you? Why do you guys feel like maybe this can make progress that others haven't, specifically in that field?
Yeah, so actually, it's a good question. And so let me just state, our this approach that we're using for NKT cells would be unlikely to apply to the
Oh,
brain.
okay.
And the reason for that is because NKT cells don't exist natively in the brain. They tend to be in the neck down. So we think we can have a massive impact on indications that are neck down. The caveat to that, which we find interesting but have not yet pursued rigorously, is that the brain to body connection. So um, sorry, I'm blanking on the terms here. Um, we'll cut that part out. But there's a strong connection between diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and getting Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
And so glucose intolerance, the inability to metabolize glucose can drive dementia. So a lot of people who get Alzheimer's now, a significant portion of them actually is driven by their diabetes, driven by their inability to metabolize glucose effectively. And that can impact the brain. So it's the gut-brain axis that's at work there. So how does the gut talk to the brain? And when the gut is messed up with diabetes, it impacts the brain. And so, very interesting part of our work. One of our value props is that this is a systemic way to ablate senescent cells. So from the neck down, and so if you can, and so we've shown in our data, we can remove senescent cells associated with type 2 diabetes. That restores glucose tolerance. It improves insulin resistance. It dramatically improves A1C levels, which are normal, which is a very regular way to get diagnosed or not for diabetes. And so we actually think that approach will have impacts on Alzheimer's. Very hard to model that in a mouse, by the way, but you think about, there's lots of evidence, though, that if you can control senescent cells or even diabetes in the periphery, it actually has very positive impacts on slowing down or halting Alzheimer's related dementia,
Yeah.
which is super interesting. And so it's been shown with metformin. Even now, it's starting to be pursued with some of the semaglutide and the Ozempic and Wegovys of the world that have shown, you can control diabetes in the periphery, and it seems that it actually has quite a positive impact on slowing or halting dementia.
It's like the whole body's connected or something.
Absolutely. You never think it sometimes based on how we talk and how we live, but yeah, the whole thing is connected. And so, especially as you get older, your blood-brain barrier starts to open up a bit, starts to weaken a bit. And when it becomes more permeable, more things are getting in from the periphery, which oftentimes can be bad. And so if more bad things are getting in, that will also drive Alzheimer's dementia.
Yeah. So, which diseases are you guys most targeting yourselves?
Yes. Yes, we have really compelling data in both pulmonary fibrosis and in type 2 diabetes. And so what we've shown is that with a single dose, we used a couple different mouse models for these, but with a single dose, we can induce, so the model basically works like this. We can induce very severe pulmonary fibrosis in mice. And we've shown that after we do that, once we activate our immune system to clear senescent cells, we can resolve the fibrosis by about 75%, which is really unheard of from one
And
dose.
can we talk about this? Because I know a tiny bit about pulmonary fibrosis just because of, like there's another medicine I was learning quite a bit about that was a PI1 inhibitor.
Yeah.
And my understanding, correct me if I got this wrong, is that like PI1 is like an enzyme that's basically like chewing through some of your lung muscle, chewing through parts of your lung you don't want chewed, and then leaves the scarring behind and hardens the lung and eventually makes it so hard to breathe. People die from pulmonary fibrosis.
Yeah, it's actually, yeah.
Is that
Go ahead.
close, or how would you correct me?
No, I think that's very good, actually. The point I want to add on to that is actually Pi 1 is one of the SAS factors that senescent cells give off. So we talk about
Oh,
this,
really?
yeah. So senescent cells, like I said, they are in even in pulmonary fibrosis. At any given time, they're eliciting up to 50 or 60 cytokines. Pi1 is one of those cytokines, and so
Oh,
that's why we like senescence is because we like to treat senescence because when you remove these cells, you're removing things like Pi1, removing things like TGF beta, which drives fibrosis, TNF alpha, IL-17A, GDF15. It just the list goes on and on. But Pi1 is one of those factors that senescent cells actually give off.
okay. And so, uh, essentially, your point there is, hey, if we can get a NKT cell to clear out the senescence before the pi1, the excess pi1 gets created, am I close to what you're trying to do there?
Yeah, in reality, we've got to think about, in mice, we can always know when disease starts, and we can model out kind of clearly where the peak is. In humans, I was operating on the assumption that we're not going to treat patients until they're pretty late stage disease. Very few humans go in and say, hey, you know, I might get sick in 5 years. Please come and start treating me now, right? We always, it's human nature. You deal with things when you have to. And so my view is that if we are looking at, Pi1 will be one of the things that we help remove through senescence, but likely it's going to be established before we do a treatment, just because that's the nature of patients. The exception to that can be that pulmonary fibrosis, some small subset of those patients are actually genetically oriented towards getting pulmonary fibrosis. So you kind of know it's going to come in your 40s and 50s in a very small group of IPF patients. So that's one area where early intervention can be possible because it's coming, and you know, in reality, and just anecdotally, those patients have seen their family members who are older live through that, and they want to get ahead of it. So I know a group like that, and they're very focused on finding treatments that can come in much earlier before the damage has taken place.
Yeah. Okay. And then let's go back to the type 2 diabetes.
Yeah, so very similar approach. In the models that we've established, we basically give mice a high-fat Western diet. It's not complicated. We induce disease. We give them these high-fat diets. We put them on these diets for about 4 months before we even think about giving them any kind of treatment. And so what happens to the mice with a high-fat Western diet is exactly what you'd expect. Their weight doubles. So it goes from about 22 grams of a normal mouse to about 50 grams, 55 grams for a high-fat diet mouse. They're obese. They get high insulin resistance, which means they can't use insulin very effectively. They have high glucose tolerance, which means that they can't metabolize the glucose very effectively. And their A1C levels, their HbA1c levels, are based on the most stable indicator of disease. And those levels, after about a month or 2 months, will start to elevate. And so, if you are a patient and you suspect you have diabetes, you would go into your clinician or your local diagnostic testing center, and the first thing they do is they take your blood and they go, how high are A1C levels? Because that's a very stable indicator of diabetes, for or against. And so if elevated A1C levels, that typically means you are type 2 diabetic or on the path. And it takes about 2 months for A1C levels to actually react to a drug. It's kind of slow to peak and then slow to come down. And so what we've shown is that when you put mice on high-fat diets, they develop a lot of senescent cells in the fat tissue, in the adipose tissue. The good news is when we use our approach, it removes those senescent fat tissue, senescent adipocytes. And when you just reestablish the homogeneity of the system, and you bring everything back to equilibrium, what happens is the mice become far less insulin resistant. They lose a little bit of weight. They become far more glucose tolerant, meaning that if you have a meal, the glucose doesn't spike nearly as high. It does a kind of a normal spike and downturn. And most intriguingly, what we've shown is that with one dose, the A1C levels will come down for about 2 months, over 2 months actually, before we have to go back and retreat again. So it's a really powerful impact. The paradigm shift here would be that instead of taking a drug every day or multiple times a day, we could treat you once every several months, once a year, twice a year, somewhere in that range to keep your diabetes at bay. So it's just a different way to think about medicine.
Yeah. So, besides waiting for you guys to get this from mice and all the way up into humans and FDA trials and waiting for this to come out, what's something
Yeah.
that people today can do to help with senescent cells? Is there like, does nutrition, exercise, sleep help? Does what helps that we can do right now?
Yeah, I just want to say this, very clear. Despite being in the therapeutics field, I am all about natural solutions. I think some oftentimes the best thing we can do is what nature armed us with, and so I think so things that for senolysis, when I say senolysis, I mean senescence reduction. It's a fancy way of saying that. Um, the best things we can do, fasting is known to be a senolytic, so a way to remove senescent cells. Basically once, and fasting is really interesting if you think about it. Once you're, on average, if you haven't eaten for 12 hours, from 12 hours and beyond, your body goes into a state of autophagy, which basically means it begins to repair itself. So basically, what we're saying is don't eat for the first 12 hours, your body basically is cleaning up the last meal you had. After that 12 hours, your body is so clear of the last meal, it says, okay, for however long from now until when you eat again, we go into a state of repair. And that state of repair oftentimes is removing senescent cells via your immune system. So that's one normal, natural way to eat less, to be healthier, to get senolysis going for you without really doing anything fancy whatsoever. Beyond that, I'm into, plant-based diets. I'm not 100% plant-based, but about 95% of my meals are plant-based. Heavy amounts of sleep, sleep as much as you possibly can, unless it's, super high number. But, I think 8 or 9 hours a night is probably what we all need. Very few of us actually get that. And then exercise, strength training, cardio. I think for whatever reason, cardio gets a bad name, but I think it's great to be able to run long distances and do that too. So I just think, vary your exercises, but, I try to hit 45 minutes to an hour every single day, no breaks, on exercise. And so I think if you can do that, you're probably giving yourself a good shot.
Yeah. Any tips for actually getting ourselves to go to sleep when we know we should?
Oh, God, it's hard. I struggle with this too. So it's not like I know all the solutions. I think if you look at the science, um, first of all, it's not a one size fits all. I'll just tell you what I think can work normally. Having a cold room is probably a big help. So your body temperature, um, it starts to you get colder at night, but having oftentimes if you wake up, sometimes you're just hot. Just whatever the blanket is too heavy. The room is too it's summer, whatever it is. But I think just having a cold room, and just being disciplined about it, right? So not drinking too much with dinner, not eating too late, having a proper meditative wind down for a couple minutes every night. Again, I'm not perfect at these things by any means, but these things do help. And if you get that extra hour, you can probably notice the next day.
Yeah. By the way, on the plant-based side,
Yeah,
my personal nutrition was like I ate like a 15-year-old until I was about in my late 30s, and then
yeah,
all of a sudden my
yeah,
metabolism changed, and so I kind of like slowed down on the sugar and carbs, but I went like heavy protein, and then vegetables and fruits, and like now hanging out
yeah,
with a bunch of you guys off the podcast and some other friends and reading the books and Longevity Diet by Walter Longo and stuff like this. I'm like I've tried to flip as much as possible where I'm doing like, even though I love steak, I'm doing a lot more like fish and shrimp and some
yeah,
chicken and then occasional steak, right? Or,
yeah,
but I'm like trying to do like, I'm trying to flip and be like primarily vegetables, maybe some fruit, and then my protein. And I can't help get away from carbs a little bit here and there.
yeah,
And I do save them up for my ice cream. I haven't given up ice cream. I'm like,
yeah. I mean,
I try to save it. But a lot of plant-based diets aren't that appealing. Like they don't taste good. And so like
yeah.
I've really got into like a lot of like olive oil and grilled vegetables kind of stuff, little salt, fresh lemon, things like that. Well, what's like plant-based longevity diet that actually tastes good to you?
Yeah, it's actually this is a fun question. Despite my full time work in biotech, I love to cook. I mean, I really love to create in the kitchen, and so I will make a lot of, typically a lot of think about cultures, right? A lot of East Asian, Indian cuisine is largely plant based. There are meat options in all these cultures, but typically if you go to India, you go to China, Taiwan, Japan, there's a lot of vegetarian options, vegan options that are really good. So I just think this is one of those things that comes down to how much we want to dedicate on learning to really cook properly, like with proper proper technique, proper sequencing of spices, thoughtfulness around vegetables, around flavors. This is what I do all weekend, so I don't, this is like how I really enjoy myself these days. So I just think it probably just takes a layer of saying, hey, forget about the traditional American view of vegan and vegetables, because often it's an afterthought in most restaurants, and just really dive into, some, like, there's some insanely good recipes that are vegan and plant-based that, and I'm like you, I love food more than more than is rational or probably okay. I did also eat like a 15-year-old boy until I was in my mid 30s, and then I got a huge wake up call with my health, and I went cold turkey and decided, I'm gonna learn how to cook great food that still
So
makes me
yeah, so
happy, but it's
give me
well,
examples, because I do think like I'm trying not to do a ton of like white rice and potatoes and some of these kind of things. I'm trying to go like more like real vegetables. But like as you're talking,
yeah,
I'm thinking, oh, there's probably some like great curries and vegetables and from India,
yes,
or there's like
artists,
it makes it like I was just thinking about like I love Japan so much, but I've only been once. And it's like, oh yeah, they have a
yeah,
bunch of like when they bring you like all these interesting dishes, a bunch of them are 100%, are either much more plant-based, a little bit of
yeah,
protein, or completely. Like, just give
yeah.
us a couple of your favorites. What do you like to cook?
Yeah, I do. I do some insane tacos. Actually, I love making tacos for my kids. They love tacos. I make these plant-based mushroom tacos. I do jackfruit tacos just on Sunday for the kids. I pair it with a lot of spicy beans. I do a little bit of rice in there sometimes. Sometimes I do tortillas, sometimes not. But I make like an avocado sauce that I really like. So it's a lot of flavors. It's usually very spicy, very flavorful. Some of the times that my kids' friends come over and they think it's too spicy, so it is what it is. I do a lot of legumes. Indian culture has a lot of good curries and legume dishes
What,
that you
like
can
which
use.
legumes?
They're called there's like a chickpea legume. There's black beans legumes. There's every bean you could ever imagine is in some Indian dish. And just you just have to know how to cook it right. If you don't spend time on learning how to cook with proper technique, it's gonna be bland and
So
boring.
this is fun for me to hear because my family teases me about how long I cook,
Yeah,
and then they really like it once I'm finished. But like for me, it's like I'm such an audiobook nerd. Uh, it's actually like very relaxing for me to like plug in an
yeah,
audiobook and cook for a while and kind of pick in as I go kind of thing. But like
yeah,
I, anyways, I think we have that a little bit in common. But I think I need to step it up
yeah.
and learn some of the recipes you're doing.
I just think cooking is very cathartic. I just think it's very soothing to like create something that can taste so good.
I do like the
Um,
creativity. I'm less of a recipe guy. I'm more of a like learn how to do this, and try
yeah,
recombining things in unique ways. Um,
yeah,
but I also like that like it makes people so happy. Like I love eating, but like
um,
I do actually like really like the reaction of like, wow,
yeah,
this is way better than I thought. This is incredible, Dad. Or something like that,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, I'm not an artistic person. I can't draw a circle to save my life, but I can create in the kitchen, and so that's where I like to put out all my energy.
Yeah.
So, and probably same for you.
Well, I want to shift gears here for a minute. Um, let's talk about growing businesses. So, give people
Sure.
just like a quick background on what you were doing before Deciduous.
Yeah, so actually, your earlier question was pertinent because I used to run an Alzheimer's diagnostic imaging company. So I created a company out of University of Texas with a scientific co-founder, and we developed a way to essentially diagnose and image, um, people we suspect of having Alzheimer's dementia. And eventually, the platform evolved in not just Alzheimer's, but eventually can now be used for wards MS, Parkinson's, and Huntington's as well. So different imaging technologies to basically stratify different dementias of disease. So I started that company from scratch, and everything I've done in my career has typically been done from, wow, that would be so interesting if we could do that. So let's do that and create a company. Started, most of my ideas have come, on the back of a cocktail napkin, just drawing things out on what the science would look like and just building from there. So I ran that company for about 6 years. Had a lot of fun. First time CEO. I think I was 27 when we started that company. So learned a lot. Learned a little bit too much sometimes because you don't know what you don't know until you know. But I'm proud to say that the company's done quite well. It's in clinical trials right now. The early results have been very very nice, very very encouraging. So I think at the end of the day, it'll be really good for the investors. Any biotech's going to take a couple of years to kind of get to the inflection point. So I think that one's close. I think it's the data looks really good, and so I'm very proud of that work.
Yeah. Let's talk about fundraising, whether it's for biotech or not. This is a topic of eternal interest for both entrepreneurs and investment fund managers who need to get their LPs.
Yeah.
What's one of your principles of fundraising that you feel like has helped you?
Yeah, I think what I really learned in my last company was clarity of message. Being on with you, your message, your questions, your explanations are super clear, and because they're clear, they're engaging. And so I think what I've learned over the years is you have to, the slides you put together, the way you speak about the work, you have to remember, and I probably still fumble this sometimes, but you've got to remember that people are hearing your idea typically for the first time. And that's going to be one of 20 ideas they might hear in just that day. So your clarity of message, your engagement of message is super important. The way I always think about it is when I talk about the work to anybody for the first time, I basically give them a trailer. I give them like the 1 minute of here's what it is, here's what's exciting, and here's ultimately why you should actually care about what we're doing. And I actually use those words. I will say, here's why you should care about this work. And so you just kind of, I just think so many people when they present, especially, academics who haven't run companies, such good science, such good ideas, a lot of times good data, but the clarity and message can be lacking. So I really try to slow down and just communicate quickly and effectively why people should be excited to continue in this conversation. That's principle number one.
Okay, great. What's number two?
Number two, you got to know what the plan is. So you got to be able to say, okay, here's where we are. So I mean, when investors are interested, it's very obvious. They'll say, tell me about your plan to get this into the clinic. Tell me about your financing plan. Tell me what the second date looks like for us is really what they're saying. And so you have to have a killer slide that can articulate very clearly, here's where your money goes. Here's what we do with it. Here's why it's valuable as an inflection point for the company. And when I was younger, I used to mess up that question all the time because I was so focused on the here and now of like, this is what we got to do today. In the next 2 weeks, we got to do this, or we can't go to the next week. And I just was so in my head about that. And so I just learned over time, like, if they're in this conversation or listening to what we're talking about, what they really want to know now is what am I going to do with their money and how am I going to make them money? And I think they care, and our investors are very, kind people. They care about the return, they care about the work we're doing, but unless there's both, then they're not going to ultimately engage with us. So it's always about telling investors like this is where we are. Your money gets spent here, and because it gets spent here, we enable this inflection point, which is good for you and good for us. And that's the message. So that's number two.
Yeah. Let's go. What's a couple of rookie mistakes that you see people make, even if they're not rookies anymore, they're still making it?
Yeah. Oh, I just think messaging, like I was saying in the first part, I looked at a deck. Keep it all confidential. I oftentimes will meet academics or early stage companies and engage and just get to know them. And they'll say, can you look at my deck and can you give me some pointers? And I'll look at the deck and it just, you kind of want to look away for a second because there's so much good there, but the way it's being rolled out is so confusing and there's no storyline, there's no narrative, there's no arc to the story that it's like it all gets subdued by lack of good messaging and lack of good looking slides. So I just and this is a mistake that I've made. So that's the reason I'm so keen on it. I remember even when we started this company, I went with our founding investor and they looked at my slides and they go, you can't show this to people. Like this is not this is bad. Like and I said, what's wrong with it? I spent weeks and weeks on this. I think it's great. And they go, look, you have two ideas at least per every slide, and people can handle one idea per slide. They want a sentence and they want a picture. Sentence, picture, sentence, picture. And so I just, I got out of the habit of trying to show how smart I was per slide and just say simplicity, sentence, picture, make a story, interest them, engage them, move on.
By the way, have you ever read Gar Reynolds' book called Presentation Zen?
No.
So this is what he used to work at Apple. Then he went over and taught design in Japan for years and years. And this is his whole premise. Basically what you're saying is like the concept of restraint, clarity, simplicity, whatever. And
Yep.
uh, anyways, I'm such a fan, but
Yeah.
you guys would get along.
Yeah, it's just, I think it's counterintuitive, right? Because you're trying to show, like, look how smart we are. Here's all this information. And people are like, whoa, I'm vomiting you're gagging me with information. Like, just slow down and give me the two or three key points. And then I'll have questions and we engage in a conversation. And then you're in a good place, right? If you just try to, like, railroad people with, look at all this data and all this information, it's like, you confuse them. When you confuse them, you lose them.
Yeah. Okay. What's another fundraising mistake you see out there?
Yeah, I think fundraising is hard. I mean, let's be honest, fundraising is hard. Even when it's easy, it's hard, right? I mean, that's just the reality of it. So I think just, one of the mistakes I made early in my career is I because I've been kind of a brute force entrepreneur in my life, which basically what that means is I just would basically try until I got to success, right? I basically just run, bang my head against the wall. Eventually the wall breaks. My neck might break in the process, but I got it done. So I didn't understand until in the last couple of years the eloquence that you can have with fundraising. And what I mean by that is you need to understand, how your company, how your program is going to be reviewed with a small group of trusted investors first. And so my approach would have been, hey, let's go talk to 75 investors. We'll hit on three or four. We're good. And what I learned the hard way is talk to three or four, give them a full pitch. It's a preview and get their feedback. And if all three or four are like, no, 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 we don't like any part of this, or here's the things we don't like, it's not going to be different with the next four, right? It's not going to be like, oh my God, now like we just talked to the wrong four first. Like it is true that eventually you got to get to the right one, but your chances of getting the right one are better after you've actually gotten feedback from people on the outside who care, who will give you honest feedback, and you just go back and fix it. It could be one more piece of data, it could be the way you're articulating the plan, that could be your indication. There's many things that could be wrong with it. But if the first four or five are saying no, it's probably a no for a while. And so you may still get there. But I've just learned the hard way, like take the feedback, work on it if you can, and then go back out properly once you've fixed what the holes are. Because internally you don't always, we're so close to it, you don't always know what the challenges are. You don't always know what people think the challenges are.
Yeah, that's a solid one. Okay. Why don't you give us one more and then I want to switch. What's another?
Fundraising challenges. Yeah, definitely signaling. I think, look, I mean, fundraising, a lot of it's FOMO, right? So, can you kind of quietly and professionally just kind of get the momentum going without being, shouting to the rooftops you're raising, a large round. So I just think you've got to, investors. I think what I didn't appreciate, it was, early in my career, I was on the investment side. And what I didn't appreciate then, which I do appreciate now, is that investors are always talking to each other. They all know each other. They get along very well. They work together. They're always back channeling on you. And so the messaging has to be consistent. You can't have one message for investor A and a second message for investor B. It doesn't work like that. And just, and really they work on, a lot of them work on FOMO. They have too many things to look at. They don't have enough time. They don't have enough interest in a lot of the things. And so they do get engaged and interested when they know that other people are looking and are also interested. And I've just seen, I've seen fundraising runs I've done myself go from like nothing on a Monday to being done by Thursday and oversubscribed by Friday. And what happened was there was momentum with one or two groups. Other people heard about it and they were like, oh my God, I decided in the last 2 days you aren't too early for us, or we're going to make an exception, whatever. And now we want to put in a couple million. And it's like, okay. So so it's just signaling and just kind of being able to coordinate that to the best of your ability is probably number three. But hard to do, but valuable.
Well, I think it directly reacts to my next one of customers, of
Yeah.
this idea of like, I don't know, humans get called sheep for a reason, I think, right? And
Yeah.
part of it's a negative and part of it's just efficiency. Like compared to doing all the due diligence possible, like if your friends who like stuff that you like say they like this, like I definitely know my friends that like if they like the movie, I'm going to take that recommendation versus other folks that I'm like, we don't like the same movies. I'm probably not,
Yeah.
or same thing, restaurants, whatever. But then sometimes I think he gets away from us. It's like, well, everybody's doing this, so it must be good enough. And we just skip our own due diligence and we do whatever.
Yeah.
And like you said, like people don't want to be left behind. We're kind of like a herd animal that way of like, I think about like little kids. Parental approval is a pretty is a pretty
Yeah.
strong survival mechanism as a little kid. I'm just
Yep.
not sure we like fully grow out of that, even when we don't need everyone else's approval. It's a lot of work to sometimes to think for ourselves, to recognize, yeah, I want that for those reasons, but those aren't the reasons I should do it, or things like that. So whether that's investors or customers, when you think about signaling that's not crass, signaling that's not look at me, look at me, look at me, but that is
Yep.
still effective. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I just think you got to be genuine and just be direct and honest with people, and I just think it's inefficient um, to do it any other way. So if you try to over coordinate or over schedule the way the fundraise goes out or how it's articulated to people, it probably tells you something about your own program. So I've just learned, just be down the middle, be efficient, be straight with people, same message. One of the slides I have in our deck is, it's not termed this way, but it's effectively communicated this way, is, why I think you should not invest in this company, right? So it's like, okay, so and I think what they get from that is like, look, he understands what can go sideways, and he's telling me right now what that can be. And then obviously the transition slide is, here's how we think about why you should invest, and here's the scientific challenges, here's the market challenges, here's how we're thinking about them and planning for them, so we can address them if they do come up. And so then I just look. I usually one of the meetings go, look, that's all the good, that's all the challenges. Let me know what you want to do, and let's just go from there. But I've told you now very clearly why I think this is a great fit, but also the hurdles ahead of us. And so what I'm doing is really effective. What I'm doing is part of their diligence for them, and I'm giving it to them. I'm saying, here, this is where I'd be looking if I were you, because some investors know where to look, some don't. And so I want to leave all those conversations feeling like I told them everything they needed to know,
Yeah.
at least everything that I thought was relevant for them to know. So I think there's an element of trust that's built up in that. Obviously, it's can be scary to think I'm telling you why not to do this, um, but in reality, they might get there anyway. So I just think that level of trust supersedes the need to put on a great show every time.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'm sure you're going to be fundraising again some point, or people are just interested
Yep.
anyways. Where are the best places for people to follow you guys online?
Yeah, they can. We've got a LinkedIn page on up as well. You can reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. Go to the website. There's an inbox there for any general inquiries. But yeah, if we see anything come through, we always try to respond to everybody. We get a lot of inquiries around when can I take these drugs. So those we have a database for those too. So whatever interest is, reach out to the company via LinkedIn or via the website, and someone will get back to you.
Yeah. What do you want to leave people with today?
Well, I just think I'm going to get back into science a little bit, because I think there's a point I want to make about longevity science. I think is really important. The real value in longevity therapeutics, in my opinion, is that you have multi-indication targets. What I mean by that is, when you look at senescence, it's one piece of disease pathology, but it affects many indications. And as we get older, our risk of having multiple comorbidities or multiple diseases increases significantly with every passing year. And so what's really interesting about longevity therapeutics is not just senescence. Senescence can impact 40, 50 different diseases in parallel, but there's other targets like that, like mitochondria, telomeres. Um, the list goes on for a while. And so I think what people don't fully appreciate about the potential about longevity therapeutics is that if any of these things, any of these single targets work, like mitochondria works for reactivation or senescence to get rid of those cells, or telomeres, or what have you, it's going to have an impact on multiple diseases at once. And to me, that represents a revolution in medicine. Most biotech, if you just look at it, what companies are licensing in, they tend to be evolutions on what we had 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So you're getting a little bit better with every passing acquisition. What you're not getting is the revolution. And I just think we've been around long enough, and we understand enough about our bodies and our biology, that we should be thinking about revolutions, not evolutions. And so, but I think in order to get a revolution, you need to think about the target you're going after scientifically, and how many different diseases can that be applied to in parallel. And that to me is where science gets exciting and meets business. And the reason I bring this up is not just the multi-indication impact and comorbidities, it's that cost of goods goes down that way, access to healthcare gets better that way. More people can become productive and healthy when we think about science in uh, a more directed, multi-indication perspective. And so one of the things I'm most proud of with our approach is that, it's a small molecule drug, but the cost, it's not expensive to make. It's stable. It can treat multiple indications at once, and because of that, it can reach many millions, if not billions, of people in the world. So it's such a huge global impact, which is good for productivity. It's good for cost. Good for everybody to think about it that way. So that's where I think longevity therapeutics actually can revolutionize biotech, versus most biotech is, as I see, more of a stepwise improvement with every passing acquisition.
Yeah, that's great. Um, so maybe to close here, for more of the folks from outside the industry who aren't reading scientific papers,
Yeah.
what books would you recommend? Are there podcasts you'd recommend? Where, who do you like their thinking of these days?
There's two books that stuck with me over the last 6, 7 years. One is by Wim Hof, What Doesn't Kill Us.
Okay.
It's all about cold water immersion. The idea of taking like a cold plunge or cold shower always scared the crap out of me. I don't know why, for like 30 years. And then when I started, it's like, the energy levels, the immune system gets ramped up. It's all bonus. It sucks for the 5 minutes. I mean, let's be honest about that. But after that, it's all gravy. It's great. I mean, so just and just discipline. Just the old army mantra of swallow the frog in the morning. So that's been my life in the last 7 or 8 years. And work out hard in the morning. Cold immersion, go to work feeling great. That's how I like to live now. So what doesn't kill us? So that was really just about mental power. So we're capable of so much more than we think we are. Our brains, divert us here and there. That's one. The second one was the importance of sleep, by Matthew Walker. I'm blanking on the exact title.
Why we sleep?
Yeah, Why We Sleep. Right. Yeah. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah. So just I've never been a great sleeper. I'm one of those people who wakes up at 2 a.m. and stares at the ceiling for 3 hours if I can. But just focusing on why we sleep and the science behind it gave me more of a reason to focus and do it properly. So it's still not perfect. I don't know that it ever will be for me, but I've just learned be proud of how much you can sleep. I think we all like have this glorified culture of be awake, burn both ends of the candle, drink 14 cups of coffee, and it's like, 1 cup of coffee should be enough, and just sleep 8 hours and exercise, and you're probably going to be healthier and happier that way.
Yeah.
So, like I said, I'm very actually, despite being in biotech, very simple about it. I think about lifestyle modifications for longevity.
What about on the straight longevity side? Do you like Peter Attia? Do you like Walter Longo? Are there others you prefer?
I never got into those two. I know that the Peter T is more on the protein side, which I can recognize as important for, and interesting to a lot of people. I just believe with enough exercise and plant-based diets and eating enough quality ingredients and quality nutrients that protein is not, in my opinion, should not be emphasized as heavily as it is. I just think that there's probably enough protein in normal healthy diets if you really focus on it and eat enough of it. I'm 41 now. I think I'm as strong as I've ever been. I haven't had much meat in the last 7 or 8 years, so it is what it is. I just think I do understand the rationale behind protein. I'm just pointing out that protein is in a lot of good things, not just animal products.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody you think we should follow?
For the next podcast.
No, I'm saying just in general. Like if we're reading a blog, listening to a podcast,
Yep.
YouTube, and any more public longevity folks that you like.
Yeah. I'm somewhat of a lone ranger. I kind of follow my own thoughts in this. I don't I
Okay.
don't follow what people say. I do take pieces here and there of what people say. I think Ryan Johnson stuff is really interesting. And I think, but what I took from it is he's really good at sleeping. That's what I learned from his. I think the rest of the stuff, could work for him great. I'm not into the supplements really, but I always hear him say how important sleep is. So that's what I remember. And beyond that, I'm more into like the Wim Hof type of mental strength and overcoming some of the mental barriers we put in front of ourselves.
Yeah.
So
You ever read any
Um,
Stoicism books?
Oh, I have not.
Okay. You don't have to do this, but I think you'd like it if you did.
No.
One of my favorites is a guy named Ryan Holiday. His book, The Obstacle is the Way. And he takes all these, Stoic principles from 2,500 years ago and gives you a modern story example, whether it's Amelia Earhart or Nelson Mandela or these people who have been up against like incredibly hard things, and they didn't let their circumstances choose their mental state. They chose their own perspective. They just, it's like a different type of mental toughness other than just gritting it out. And
Yeah.
I'm a fan. Anyways.
Yeah. I think that's a great suggestion. I will pick that up.
Yeah. Any book recommendations for me? Entrepreneur, fundraising, CEO stuff.
I'm trying to think. I just feel like some of the things I read have been so specific towards, like there've been nuggets that have been helpful, but not the whole thing that I would like really jump into. I really don't read, it's counterintuitive. I really don't read a lot of entrepreneurship books. I kind of just feel like at some point so much advice is too much advice. And so when I was younger, I used to take way too much advice, and I think I lost who I was as a person as a result of it for a while. So I really don't read a lot of those books. I mean, sometimes I'll pick up a tidbit here and there, but it's not. I've learned over the years, like just you're unique. You can only do it a certain way,
Yeah.
and that's I don't need to read if I were to take too much in, it kind of I lose who I am.
I know that, where it's like, I feel like I do read a ton. For me, it's like, I want to know all the possible ingredients for baking this cake, but then sometimes I'm so busy. I've been so busy finding the new ingredients. Like, what does the next book say? What does the next book say? That I'm not slowing down to say, like, well, what do I really believe? And what matches with my experience and the experience of the people I interview on the show. And like I've been adding the possibilities without subtracting what I'm actually going to use. And okay, okay,
So
I'm going to go. What were you going to say?
That said, there's one book that I've always loved. So Michael Lewis, one of my favorite authors. There's a book he wrote maybe 10 years ago called The New Thing, and it wasn't one of his most hyped books, but I think it might have been his best. It just talks about entrepreneurship, talks about how different people have done it, and so I learned a lot of pieces from that I thought were really interesting.
Yeah.
And Michael Lewis is just, what a writer. I mean, the guy can just frame a story in a way that, I mean, he could write about like beans in a forest, and you're like, wow, this is incredible. So, but he
I'm
wrote,
such a Moneyball fan, and I have not read
Yep.
this one, so I'm going to go put that on the Audible.
It is really good. It's just
The new thing.
The eccentricities of Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, and there's a piece of that in all of us. And so I thought when I read that, it kind of flipped me towards being even more of an entrepreneur than I was before.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Yep.
Okay, well, thanks for making time for this.
All right. Thanks so much, Jess. I really, really love being on, and thank you so much for the questions.
Yeah, bye, everyone.